Good morning and welcome to the second webinar in our Beyond the Asset series discussing measures of success in catchment management. I'm delighted to be your chair today and welcome our expert panel of speakers offering insight into their own approaches to tracking water quality and performance in catchment management. We all know it's a certainty that population growth and climate change are placing a growing demand on the need for increased resilience to protect our water resources. Sustainable catchment-based solutions can achieve water quality improvements to address activities that impact water quality. These solutions encompass complex interactions and controls that focus on protecting and enhancing our natural environment. And today we're asking how we can improve our understanding of the effectiveness of multiple mitigation measures on pollutants, such as phosphorus and nitrates, at catchment scales. In this session, our speakers will discuss their own measures of success, where they've seen effective results, how innovation and stakeholder engagement has been key to decision making, and now how they are looking ahead to the future. We have Paul Stanfield and Dr. Sophie Sheriff from Wessex Water, Dr. Jody Rotino from Severn Trent Water, Emily Imrie, Senior Consultant at Stantec, and myself, Paul Hume, Technical Director and Catchment Management Specialist at Stantec. We would like to hear your opinions throughout the session, and between our presentations we'll be giving you the chance to answer some quick-fire poll questions on your own catchment management experiences. And after our presentations you can put your questions to our panel in our Q&A session. So let's get started with our first speakers today. Paul Stanfield may need no introduction to a lot of people. He's been at Wessex Water for a long time and manages their catchment delivery work. Dr. Sophie Sheriff leads their catchment teams in collating data, designing field trials, and monitoring networks, and also analysis and reporting. Sophie is at the sharp end of efforts to understand and explain the impacts of catchment interventions. So Paul and Sophie, thank you very much, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Paul, and yeah, welcome virtually at least to the West Country, where Wessex Water, obviously. We've titled the presentation "Trying Hard Not to Build for the Future" for reasons hopefully that will become apparent as we go through the talk. But just really to start off, telling you a little bit about Wessex Water. So basically, as a water company, we're reliant for about 80% of our drinking water supplies on groundwater. We've got a lot of smallish sources around the patch, and that 80% is more or less mostly from the chalk and the eolites in the north, and then the 20%. And generally speaking, the nitrate, the quality of water in the ground is pretty good. Chalk is great, but we do have additional treatment plants at a number of our sites to deal with specific issues such as nitrate and pesticides. The remaining 20% comes from surface reservoirs, mostly in the Somerset area. And actually, we don't have any direct river abstractions, so that's not really an issue for us. But building treatment, as we know, is the most immediate and effective way of dealing with water quality problems, of taking out those bits of the water that we don't want. But we all know that costs a lot of money, whether that's treating water that we would take in for drinking water supply, or whether that's treating effluent that goes out through our sewage treatment works into the environment. They're expensive measures to build and to run. And then don't forget that there's carbon, that every time we do build a new treatment works to take a specific element out, there's a carbon consequence as a result of that. So we've known, and this is well known now, that catchment management is an option in terms of not building in assets. Just really to emphasize that the key to this all is building relationships, and it's really the sort of the central bit of our work is very dependent on the sustainable relationships that we develop with the farmers, and the quality of those relationships is very important. So we have a trained in-house team of agriculturalists who can talk to farmers on a technical level. And it's really the sort of the quality of those relationships that actually is one of the most important measures of the success of our schemes. In simple terms, just to understand the impact of the interventions that we take in the catchment, we just take a very basic source pathway receptor approach. Understanding what's happening in the catchments in the source and how those are linked to our receptors through the various pathways, whether that be through the ground or the surface water, is obviously very important. The important bits for us, obviously the source and the pathway represent the catchments, and as I say, understanding all those routes is sort of key to making sure that we're doing the right thing. And part of that, a major part of that, as I've said, is that the catchment also involves people and how people behaves, and understand how people behave, and understanding that is key really to understanding what approaches to take within the catchments. So the first task really is to define where the catchments are. Easier in surface water because we'd simply take the topographic catchment. More difficult in groundwater, and we rely heavily on modelling. And we've developed a Wessex Basin model for our area with the EA and woods, and we use that. I mean, those have been used to define source protection zones, and we've taken we've sort of abstracted heads from those to develop capture fraction modeling, which allows us to understand the proportion of each cell in that model, how much of water going into that cell and out of it will eventually be abstracted from our source. And so we contour our catchments, and then we sort of look at that and we say, well, okay, which farms are in, which are out, and we draw a line around farms. So we've got a sort of an operational target area which we target. The catchment risk assessment process really is driven by the drinking water safety plans. And really the task here is to start to identify the metrics that we want to use. So the desk study and the catchment walkover, obviously I try to identify who the landowners are, what sort of tenancies, what are their agreements on the land, what's the land use, the agricultural and the non-agricultural activity. And that leads us to understand what the metrics would be. And there's a list there which will be familiar to you of the total number of farmers, the hectareage available, and what are the potential risks. And really key to understanding it as well is to understand the water quality of the sources. So we do a lot of work looking at the full range of water quality to actually understand what the actual water quality risks are, what are the parameters of concern. And the water quality trending allows us to assess any impacts that we have on those trends. But again, going back to farmer engagement, that's another important aspect of monitoring what we do. And the purpose of that is obviously to build that initial relationship of trust, to understand what the businesses, how they're run, what their plans are, and so on. Really, and importantly, to understand the degree of compliance with all the relevant regulations, so that we know what we're working with. We know we're not double funding. We know we're not paying farmers for things they should be doing already. Most of our agreements are really on a one-to-one level. We do use online auctions using Entrade, where there's more sort of generic measures to be put in place. And we're trialing this market-based approach where we're looking at multi-benefit, multi-seller, multi-buyer situations. We're trialing that for phosphorus in Somerset. And then really scoping the catchments. So each of our catchments is very different. So the Black Lane catchment is a groundwater source, heavily agricultural and arable agriculture. Monkswood is a spring-fed reservoir, a lot of triple SIs, and very different sort of catchments. So very important to understand the level of catchments, the type of catchment you're working in. And then they come to the monitoring. And again, the philosophy going from left to right in this diagram is starting on the ground, literally, and then working through the soil. We're starting with what the inputs are being put in, working through the soil, what's leaching out the bottom of the soil, what gets into the deeper groundwater, and ultimately, obviously, at our source, monitoring really to try and intercept, the impacts at each of those stages. And porous pots, just to pick on one, we do a lot of porous pot work. That's measuring the leachate that goes through the bottom of the soil. And in terms of nitrate, that's particularly useful, and it very, very clearly demonstrates that if you do manage the land above, you do have an impact on what leaches out of the ground, and you can see the relationships quite clearly. It's much more difficult and longer term to measure, obviously, the end point. And I'm now going to hand over to Sophie.
Okay, great. So the camera on. So I'm just going to share with you a couple of. That's not gone correctly, is it? Okay. That should have appeared anyway. Right. So I'm going to share just a couple of things, case studies about catchment management, our approaches, but also how we monitor for success in these. A bit of a blip with the slides here that you've got a graph covering the two behind it, but I can talk around them. So as a groundwater dominated water company, as Paul described earlier, nitrate is the long-standing issue. And we can see, well, we would like to have seen two examples of how the above ground measures really impact and come out in different ways for below ground. So on the left-hand side is a Dorset groundwater source where basically a thin unsaturated layer is let to us see results much more quickly. The right hand side is a much more challenging example that despite catchment management above ground, that further below actually the results are still yet to be being seen, and that is that process of the source transfer continuum of the nitrates and the transport processes of that. And what do we do with those data? Well, we can really use the data to kind of look at, well, where are we going? What's happening in the future? So the graph in the middle there is trending, and that work lets us see, well, what might the likely successes of catchment management be, and understanding how these processes work in the catchment, but then practically, operationally, how do we help our colleagues on the water supply part of the business to plan ahead in terms of blending, and to secure drinking water of the right quality for our customers. So the next, we have a small malfunction here. Just give me a second. I don't think so. Here we go. We're back on. Here we go. Okay, so moving on to pesticides and the situation in particular at one of our Weymouth groundwater sources. Now, in the early 2000s, you can see the detections of total and individual pesticides well above that 0.5 microgram per litre limit, combined limit. And this was tackled thanks to work with our advisors with a no spray agreement and construction of a spray shed by about mid 2000 to 2005. However, you can see even after that date, there was another significant peak, and most of that is due to MCPB, which then led us to support construction of a washdown shed, and that was found to be what contributed towards that. And since then, you can see that the limits of compliance have been much better. So completely below the 0.5 combined pesticide drinking water standard, but also mostly below that individual 0.1 as well. And we know that the kind of surface water groundwater interactions are key in this catchment. So we can actually use proxy measures in terms of monitoring for success. We can use turbidity as a surrogate measure in this catchment. So turbidity peaks lead us to kind of have an extra vigilance around pesticides. And it's meant that the landowner has been able to convert to conventional farming with a list of approved pesticides, and yet maintain concentrations in the source below those limits. Another example at one of our surface water sources near Bridgewater, and metaldehyde is very much the issue here, traced back to slug pellets, for which a substitute for ferric phosphate was implemented in this catchment, which, as you can see from the green dots, worked quite well as active catchment management started. However, the grey lines in the background correlating with the canal intake, which feeds into that reservoir, was still seeing quite significant peaks. Now, we're actually able to monitor that intake at that location before it comes into the catchment, and that gives us a 3-day delay time. So in terms of practical approaches for ensuring compliance at the reservoir, we actually monitor at that intake, and any concentrations that are looking to cause us an issue, we then prevent that from getting into the reservoir. And that can be seen on the graph is kind of the divergence between the grey line and the green line, and that's keeping us under that 0.1 microgram per litre limit. And finally, we have the story of bentazone in 2 of our groundwater sources. So on the left-hand side, the Salisbury groundwater source. Basically, since we started monitoring for bentazone, it has been found there. You can see found across the site, the boreholes there, and it's got high seasonal variability as well. Despite kind of specific observation boreholes and kind of catchment research, we can't find a known source of that, so it's been attributed to historic use, and it's something that just has to be monitored, but mostly stays below that 0.1 microgram per litre. And then in contrast, a very different dynamic there on the right hand side for the Warminster groundwater source, where a known application of bentazone to a field of beans back in 2017 was picked up through catchment management work. Bentazone sampling began and was continued until it was first detected in 2019. This has overwhelmingly impacted one of the boreholes, which has now come out of supply. But we've been supported by the Environment Agency with a kind of strongly worded letter to catchment farmers to prevent further usage of bentazone in that catchment. So we have ongoing sampling and some simple modelling to see what's going to happen there, and that's all ongoing work to ensure we can meet compliance at those groundwater sources. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Sophie. That's great. And just to finish finally on sort of the measures of success, which are really a summary of what we said, is we start really at the top end, looking at what the numbers of farmers are engaged, and then working through the tonnages of nitrogen and phosphorus, for example, that have been calculated or measures. And then if further down, hectareage of measures applied, and you can go on down that list. Ultimately, of course, we're looking for compliance with drinking water standards and with environmental targets, and obviously the aim of that, coming back to the title of our presentation, really is that we want to try and achieve that without actually building additional treatment. That's the task, and I think that concludes our talk.
Thank you, Sophie and Paul. Paul, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Yeah, good. Just checking. Thanks very much. Yeah, that was brilliant and spot on time. So many thanks. So we'd now like to get some feedback from you, the audience. We've got a short question on your experience with implementing measures in a catchment. So take a look at the poll question on your screen and just click yes or no, please. That's all you need to do. And the results should start to come up. Great, thank you. Well, that's encouraging that more have said yes than no, because it's often a bone of contention with projects that they struggle to collect the data and the long-term data that they need to see what's worked and what hasn't. But that's really useful to know that, and we'll feed that in to the question and answer session at the end. And just to remind everybody, there's a question box on your right dashboard on the right-hand side. There's some little grey lines. One of them says questions about halfway down. If you've got a question for any of the speakers, then put your question in there, and then I'll see it, and then I can feed that through to the question and answer session afterwards. Okay, so thanks everyone. Now to our next speaker, Jody Rotino from Severn Trent Water. So Dr. Jody Rotino is the Catchment Management and Biodiversity Business Lead in Severn Trent. She manages the Catchment and Biodiversity team. So welcome, Jody. We'll just load your slides up. And I know that your team focuses on preventing pollution reaching Severn Trent Water's raw water abstractions, groundwater and surface water, and you're going to talk to us about that program you got for doing that. And I also know that your team has recently won the 2020 Water Industry Alliance and Partnership Award, and finalists in the Utility Week Community Investor Award. So as with Wessex, I think you've got a long history and experience of working in catchment management. So we look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thank you.
Hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
So thanks, Paul, and thank you for inviting me to come and present today. So I'm going to be talking about catchment management at Severn Trent Water and what we've been doing over the last 10 years, really, our Farming for Water programme and what we've managed to achieve to date and how we've been monitoring success. So slightly differently to what Paul and Sophie just spoke about. So I'll take you through what we've been doing and what success looks like to us and then just summarise at the end. So those of you that don't know about Severn Trent Water, we are flat bang in the heart of England, and we stretch from Scunthorpe and the Humber up in the north down to the Severn Estuary in the south, and we go across to Wales with our Havern Dyfed business as well. So we supply around 4.3 million homes per day with water that serves about 8 million people. And really, the key to this and our ability to do this efficiently and effectively is the water environment, and it is our key asset that we need to protect and build resilience, really, so we can continue to use the asset into the future. So now my screen is frozen. Try again.
We can see AMP 5, 6 and 7 on the screen.
Can you see that now? Good.
Yeah.
I'm struggling. My screen's frozen again. Let's try again. There we go. So catchment management at Severn Trent really started back in the early 2000s. We had a farm safe and spray safe schemes working with a small number of catchments. But I guess it really kicked up and really started to expand in 2010 when we had metaldehyde issues. And at the start of AMP5, we had 7 surface water and 49 groundwater catchment investigations, which have really been the basis and building block of our catchment schemes. Moving into AMP6, those investigations stopped and they became full-blown catchment schemes. And in order to deliver those schemes, we recruited 8 Severn Trent agriculture advisors and 12 partnership advisors. So these are advisors that we work with and we fund through Wildlife Trust and the Rivers Trust as well. We launched our farmer grant scheme across 26 catchments, and we also launched our Attainment for Ecosystem Services scheme for metaldehyde. And we started to investigate 13 other catchments and trialled intake management. Moving on to AMP7, all of those schemes have continued. We've employed more agriculture advisors to help us across our catchments, and we're now working on 44 catchments across the Severn Trent region, and starting to think about what else other than water quality, what can catchment management, what benefits can they bring to us as a company. And my screen's frozen again.
Jody, would you like me to run your slides?
Yes, please. I seem to be happy. I think my internet may have gone. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Let me know which side you were. Is this the right slide?
That's the next slide. So sorry. So what does our catchment programme look like? We've called it Farming for Water, and we work across 44 priority catchments, which you can see there on the slide. We work in around 11 surface water catchments, and the rest of the catchments are made up of groundwater sources. And we offer a programme of farmer engagement, advice, training and specialised visits. We have our own grant scheme called STEPS and our farm to tap scheme for metaldehyde. And we also run pesticide amnesties. So in terms of the things that we're looking at, mainly pesticides, they're our biggest issue. And we also have schemes for cryptosporidium, nitrates, colour, and we're also looking at phosphate and biodiversity. And as I mentioned before, these are delivered through our own internal agriculture advisors as well as 12 partnership advisors. So if I could have the next slide, please. So what do these schemes look like and what do we offer? So our Farm to Tap scheme is our payment for ecosystem services scheme. It's designed for metaldehyde and we'll pay farmers up to £8 per hectare to be part of the scheme. And basically we pay them for improvement in water quality. So over the metaldehyde season, we will take upstream and downstream water quality samples of around of small subcatchments of around 20 farmers. And if there's no deterioration or an improvement in their water quality in terms of metaldehyde concentrations, they will get a payment. If it's below drinking water standard, they'll get a bonus. And if there's a deterioration in that water quality, they can potentially get no payment at all. And it's great for making farmers work together. Peer pressure is a wonderful thing. We have our own grant scheme called STEPS, Severn Trent Environmental Protection Scheme, and we offer grants up to £10,000 per farm per year to address the priority water qualities in the catchment where they are. And these mainly focus on infrastructure investments and land management changes. We only ever offer 50% funding for an item, and we expect the farmer to be able to match fund that in either payment in kind or a capital investment. Like many companies, we run annual pesticide amnesty, and then we also have our own specialist on-farm advice visits, and these are bespoke visits that support farmers with some of the more difficult steps items where there might need to be some design work done, and we also offer soil and manure sampling under that. And more recently, we've got our Swap Your Nozzles training, which is talking to farmers about best practices around pesticides application. It's a training program, and then we'll also offer the farmers a new set of low drift nozzles, and it's been hugely successful over this last year. So we're scaling that up and using it across all of our catchments at the moment. So we can have the next slide, please. So what have we achieved to date? So it's just some of our progress. So since the start of Antsex, we've engaged with over 6,000 farmers. We've removed 20 tonnes of unwanted pesticides through our pesticide amnesty. We've signed up 46,000 hectares of oilseed rape and winter crops to our Farm to Tap scheme, and we've awarded over 2,343 STEPS grants. And you've just got some of the pictures there, the types of grants that we offer, and they're wide ranging. From pesticide washdown areas to biofilters, rainwater harvesting, and some more innovative things, signal crayfish trapping. And more recently, we've opened up our STEPS programme to offer biodiversity improvement as well. Next slide, please. So as you all know, there are many, many benefits of catchment management. And when we are talking to stakeholders and we're talking to farmers and trying to work with them, we can tailor those benefits. So whether it be looking at protected designated areas, soil protection, or enhancing biodiversity, we can tailor our STEPS programme to help the farmers do items that will help us, but also benefit the interests that they have on their farm. But I guess as a water company, you can just click, please. We are mainly interested in improving water quality and how we monitor water quality and those improvements in water quality as well. So we know that we won't see improvement straight away. You've got things like crop rotations, you've got weather impacting, and in those groundwater water services, you've got those long travel times that will impact on whether or not we will see a water quality improvement and when we might see that as well. So if I can have the next slide, please. So we designed 3 stages really to how we monitor our progress. So if you just click again, please. In Antsex, we were predominantly looking at kind of measures that would indicate that we were going to see water quality improvements. So we were looking at the number of farmers we engaged with, the number of farmers that signed up to our scheme, whether or not farmers were reducing metaldehyde use, and then whether or not that engagement that we had with farmers was positive, and whether or not they were improving their knowledge about water quality issues and the issues that Severn Trent were facing within their catchments. If you click again, please. Moving into this AMP, into AMP7, we're trying to be more outcome focused and look at pesticide load reduction targets for each of the catchments. And I've got some slides later that will talk about that. And if you click again for me, please. In AMP8, we are starting to think about, hopefully going to start to think about whether or not we can start to look at measures and progress such as reducing our amount of treatment or changing our treatment, our blends, or looking at how often we need to regenerate GAC at some of our surface waterworks. So you can see there's like a travel and phasing of the sort of success we're hoping to see as we move forward from AMP7 into AMP8. Have the next slide, please. So moving from AMP6 into AMP7, we're moving from outputs to outcomes. So we've been looking at creating pollution load reduction targets for each of our catchments, and they might be whether that be a pesticide or nitrate or cryptosporidium load reduction target. And this slide here just shows how we've gone about calculating the load reduction targets for pesticides. So what we've done, we've taken looked at the treatment capacity, the GAC treatment capacity at our treatment works, and looked at the maximum concentration that will pose a challenge to that treatment works. We've then looked at the incoming water quality from 2000 to 2015 to give us the high peak pesticide concentration that has arrived at that works. And then the difference between those two concentrations has given us the reduction target that we need. And we've represented that target as a percentage. What we've then done is used Farmscoper to look at what the baseline load is within the catchment and what the load reduction would need to be to enable us to meet that percentage reduction so that our treatment works can cope with the amount of pesticides coming into the works. And you just see in that table there the load reduction ranges that we're looking at. So some are quite small, others are, up at 88% reduction, load reduction that we need in a catchment to ensure there's no challenge at the works. So I can have the next slide, please. So what does this mean for performance? So this is just an example of where we've looked at how we're performing. So this was kind of the middle of AMP6 in one of our catchments, and how if we move to outcomes, pollution load reduction target, what that would mean for the work we were doing in the catchment. So this is the Lem catchment in Warwickshire. It's one of our most challenging catchments. So we name a pesticide, we find it at the treatment works there. So we knew we had nearly 400 priority farmers, and at the stage when we did this analysis, we'd engaged with around 49% of them and awarded 62 grants. So if you look at that conversion factor from engagement to grants actually being applied and delivered on the ground, it was around 33%. Now, in order to meet the load reduction target, using Farmscoper to help us model this, we knew that we had to get to a 58% conversion factor. So we, needed to increase that conversion ratio by more than 20%. So we used Farmscoper to look at what steps options, what priority options was going to help us reach that target. And as you can imagine, the high hitting ones are things like pesticide sprayer washdown areas, biobeds and biofilters. And the numbers there show the amount that we're going to need to introduce into the catchment to meet the pollution load reduction target. And what's concerning, I say, in a challenge, these are quite expensive items for a farmer, and the types of items we want farmers to do will impact on their yields and profits. So it's going to be more difficult this AMP for us to incentivize farmers through our STEPS program. I can have the next slide, please. So we looked at the probability of success. We didn't want to set ourselves pollution load reduction targets going into AMP7 if we didn't think we would be able to meet them or have a small probability of being able to meet them. And so we did some Monte Carlo analysis, and we knew from this that a 50% probability that at least 23 of the 44 targets catchments we were working in would meet their pollution load reduction targets. So that's what the graph on the left-hand side shows you there. The graph on the right-hand side is actually our year 1 AMP7 progress to date, and this is just our surface water catchments. And overall, we've actually got 10 catchments that have met their end of AMP pollution load reduction target, and another 6 that met their year 1 pollution load reduction target. So we're actually doing quite well, although it's still a challenge in some catchments. You can see there, someone like Staunton Harold, we are quite far away from meeting our target. So we do know it's still going to be a challenge to meet that end of AMP7 pollution load reduction target. So if you move to the next slide, please. But we're quite confident we might get there. End of AMP6, we'd had some really good early successes. We knew that 90% of all farmers that worked with us said it was a positive experience. And we knew that if we could work collaboratively with agriculture partners, farmers and landowners and other NGOs across our catchments, we would be able to hit those targets. And this is kind of boosted by the fact that over AMP6, our Farms Tap scheme resulted in a 63% reduction in metaldehyde peaks. Our STEPS programme helped us reduce pesticide peaks coming into our work between 40 and 90%. And we've actually got one catchment where we decided not to install GAC, one of our surface water catchments at Tiddsworth, at Reservoir. There was an AMP6 programme to install a GAC plant there. Our catchment management has been so successful, we are not installing that GAC there. And we've also decided not to install nitrate plants at 5 of our groundwater sites. Can you just click for me, please?
How are you doing, Jody?
So yeah, not too bad. I'm nearly done. For every £1 we spend in catchment management, we avoid £2 to £20 in treatment costs. And then we've got those greater environmental benefits as well, 70% in reduction in peat erosion. We've planted over 700,000 trees and improved 750 kilometres of rivers as well. So just click for me again, please. So we know for every £1 we spend on catchment management, we can bring in £4 in wider environmental benefits. And I think my next slide is my final slide. So just to summarise, in AMP6, we worked in 27 catchments. We engaged with over 5,000 farmers and we invested £5.7 million in our STEPS programme. But we had some really significant reductions in peak pesticide and nitrate concentration. So it's a hugely successful programme. We're building on that in AMP7, looking at 44 catchments and widening our programme to look at biodiversity and those wider water environmental benefits. And we're really challenging ourselves to be more outcome focused in terms of what we measure and looking at pollution load reduction targets. So it's a significant step up from AMP6, but the successes we've had to date have given us real confidence that we can achieve this in AMP7. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry about the technical difficulties.
Yeah, no worry. And yeah, gave you a bit of time because you you had some problems with that. So hopefully that wasn't too rushed. No. I'm sorry that you had problems with the technical difficulties, but yeah, hopefully that was enough time. Thanks very much. It was really useful to hear what you had to say. And once again, we'd like to ask you, you the audience, a poll question to get some insight into your own catchment experiences. So that the question's on the screen there. This time, can you choose one selection, one answer out of the 3? And just click the buttons and they should come up. And we've got a couple of questions in the questions box, so thank you for those. Any more, please write them in. And we'll feed them into the question and answer. The middle one's intriguing. Yeah, okay. So about 50% seen some impact on what you expected, but at least 30% seen impacts and they were different to what you expected. So maybe we can start to pick up with that later on. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to carry on now. So our final presentation comes from Stantec's Emily Imrie. And again, while the slides are loading, I'll just tell you something about Emily. She's a senior environmental consultant at Stantec. Again, like Paul Stansfield, she started her career as a hydrogeologist, but now she specialises in water quality analysis and catchment management investigations, and has been doing that for a number of years in our team. And Emily's going to talk about a project that's recently been done with Bristol Water. Over to you, Emily. Thank you.
Hi, can you see my slides okay? They didn't come up for me in the share like before.
I can see them. Yeah.
Perfect.
Can
Okay,
you not see them?
so no. Oh, I can see them on my screen, but anyway.
Do you want
Emily.
Catherine to run them for you, or are you okay?
No, it's okay. I can see them on my screen. It's just not in the sharing box. But
Okay.
as long as you can see them, it's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm Emily. I'm a senior consultant in the catchment management team here at Stantec. And today I'm going to be presenting to you some work we did with Bristol Water to measure the effectiveness of their catchment phosphorus scheme. So Bristol Water has a performance commitment to improve the raw water quality in reservoir catchments in the Mendips. In order to meet their commitment, Bristol Water are aiming to reduce the load of phosphorus that's lost to the environment in these reservoir catchments through delivery of farm-based interventions. Interventions include capital improvements on farms delivered with the support from their catchment grant scheme, and also management change through delivery of free advice around nutrient management and nutrient management planning. So some of the measures included in the schemes include provision of those nutrient management plans, implementation of overwintering cover crops, grassland aeration, and then more infrastructure related schemes like roofing of livestock yards. So there are 3 reservoir catchments in the Mendips that we've been considering. Top to bottom down the right hand side here, we have lovely pictures of the Blagden, Cheddar and Chew Valley reservoirs. And you can see that they're catchments typified by the steep hills, undulating plateaus of the Mendips. We're also taking into account inter-catchment transfers, such as that from the River Axe to the Cheddar Reservoir and the Chew Magna Reservoir to the Chew Valley Reservoir. Up in the green catchment here, because the catchments to these intakes also are directly affecting the water quality of the reservoirs that we're considering. So building on Paul and Sophie's conclusion regarding the measures of success and Jody's discussion around the outputs to outcomes, one of the challenges that water companies are faced with when establishing their performance commitments to improve raw water quality is how best to measure and track progress and success of catchment management schemes. So we can measure the water quality of the reservoirs, of course, but it takes a long time for changes in P input to be realised, certainly on the timescales of the AMP cycles that we're often working to, at least in terms of targets. Also, catchment management interventions are targeting farming, which, while a significant contributor to P loadings in the catchment, are not likely to be the sole source, and other sources may be outside the influence of the water company. So for these reasons, Bristol Water are assessing their progress against their targets around reducing P loss to the reservoir using ADAS's Farmscoper tool that Jody's already mentioned. So Farmscoper predicts pollutant losses from farms under a baseline situation. So typical fertiliser applications by crop type, typical manures, and no mitigation measures in place. Farmscoper can also estimate the pollutant losses from farms if measures were implemented to reduce them. And then the difference between these two estimates is the change in loading or the mass of nutrients not lost to the environment according to the implementation of measures, and that's what we're interested in. So in terms of data collation, Bristol Water are recording the size and type of each farm they engage with, including details such as the hectareage of arable crops or the number of dairy cows, metrics like that. And they're also recording the measures that each farm decides to take up from their offering of measures they have available. And we feed all of this data into Farmscoper, which I'll now run through in a little bit more detail. So for those of you that are less familiar with Farmscoper, ADAS describe it as a decision support tool that can be used to assess diffuse agricultural pollutant loads on a farm and quantify the impacts of farm mitigation measures on these pollutants. It was originally designed to be used at the farm scale, but more recently it was expanded to allow the tool to be applied at the catchment scale as well. So Bristol Water are interested in how the farm-based measures on offer through their programme are reducing the catchment P load. So for that reason, we're using Farmscoper Upscale, which is the catchment scale version of the tool. Farmscoper Upscale comes pre-populated with agricultural census data at various catchment scales, the smallest being WFD water body, which is most similar to our reservoir SGZ catchments, but it does require some adjustment. So for example, the Blagden reservoir catchment is part of one WFD water body, while the Chew Valley reservoir catchment is made up of 2 complete WFD water bodies and 1 partial. So what we do is we scale the ag census data already in Farmscoper using the areas of arable land and grassland that are found within the reservoir catchment compared to that in the WFD water body or water bodies. And we calculate livestock numbers in the catchments, assuming the stocking density remains the same as the WFD water body. And importantly, we adjust the farm distribution to ensure that the combinations of farm type, soil drainage type, and rainfall band, which are the key variables in Farmscoper, that are found within the reservoir catchments are well represented in the tool. We can then use Farmscoper to estimate the baseline loading of the reservoir catchments. When it comes to the implementation of measures in Farmscoper, Bristol Water's interventions that are on offer, we need to match those to the library of measures that are in Farmscoper, of which there are 105. And then in Farmscoper, implementation of measures is entered as a percentage rather than an absolute value. So those metrics that Bristol Water are collecting around uptake of their measures, we need to express them as a percentage of the scaled agricultural census data that we've used in our baseline runs. We then use the evaluate together function of Farmscoper, which is where the tool estimates the new loading of the catchment as a result of implementing all of the specified measures, and then subtracting this new loading from the baseline gives us the change in loading, or the P that's not been lost to the environment that we're interested in. The evaluate together function of Farmscoper also takes account of mutual exclusivity of measures and diminishing returns, which means where 2 or several measures are impacting the same pollutant pathways. It doesn't equate to an additive impact, so it's estimating a more realistic total load reduction for us. That being said, Farmscoper does have significant inherent uncertainties. And so we've applied a Monte Carlo approach to the results that offers appreciation of some of these uncertainties. So Monte Carlo is a multi-probability simulation to estimate possible outcomes of uncertainties. Some of the uncertainties inherent to Farmscoper include inaccuracies in the ag census data, worse at smaller spatial scales due to issues like protecting anonymity of farmers within the data that's included in the Farmscoper tool. The effectiveness of individual measures may also not be well constrained from like literature research that's been done, or also measures can vary considerably in effectiveness depending on how they've actually been implemented by an individual on the ground. And again, this uncertainty is worse at smaller spatial scales where there are fewer farms implementing measures to average out to being what's representative of typical. So we account for these uncertainties inherent to Farmscoper with a simple plus or minus 20% in our Monte Carlo simulation. Focusing more specifically on phosphorus, surface connectivity is an important factor to consider because areas with higher connectivity can present a higher risk of diffuse pollution. So surface connectivity in Farmscoper uses the psychic model that underpins the Farmscoper calculations. And that's based around a conceptual framework of source mobilization delivery, where the sources of phosphorus are mobilized by incident rainfall and then delivered to water bodies via surface runoff and subsurface flow. Farmscoper does not recognise the location of modelled farms and landscapes or the distance to the receiving water body, and so it can't use location-specific values of connectivity. Instead, it uses a generic surface connectivity factor, which is a function of soil type and rainfall on a farm, those key variables that are in Farmscoper. So we account for uncertainty in this generic factor that's used in our Monte Carlo approach. So we represent both of the uncertainties I've discussed using a uniform distribution where the central value is 1. So this means that the 50th percentile of our Monte Carlo results is the same result that comes from the Farmscoper output. However, we also present the 10th percentile and 90th percentile results. And as I said, these just really give us an appreciation that there are uncertainty in these results and the magnitude of those. So maps of surface connectivity, such as this one on screen, which is produced using SciMap, can also be used as a line of supporting evidence to enable Bristol Water catchment advisors to identify farms that are located in higher risk areas of the catchment. So that's shown by the warmer colours on this map. So these areas might benefit from additional measures to control runoff, and identifying high risk areas in the catchment could offer opportunities for more cost-effective intervention. We also considered topsoil P content because risk of particulate P transfer in a catchment is primarily a function of the soil total P content, rainfall intensity, and the risk of soil erosion. So Farmscoper provides estimates of particulate P and sediment exported from a farm based on an assumed topsoil P content of about 0.1%. But there are other tools such as the BGS UK Soils Observatory, the map shown on screen here, again a heat map, that accounts for some spatial variability when considering topsoil P content. So you can see in our catchments, topsoil P ranges from about 0.5 in the Chew Valley, and it's as low as around 0.06 in the Cheddar catchment. So that's different to the 0.1% assumed in Farmscoper. Spatial outputs like these can assist Bristol Water's catchment advisors again in targeting farms where topsoil P might be higher, such as those areas in the Chew Valley Reservoir up there, because particulate P losses may be more significant in these areas due to maybe over-fertilization. So while effectiveness of measures and surface connectivity have uncertainty about essential value, the topsoil P assumptions actually bias the results, baseline and the change in loading. So this bias should be removed through local nutrient management. So just to summarise, Farmscoper provides us with an excellent solution for quantitatively monitoring and tracking the effectiveness of a farm-based catchment management scheme. It's particularly useful to us over those 5-year AMP timescales where we might not see changes in the actual water quality of the water body that we're monitoring. Applying a Monte Carlo approach to the outputs we get from Farmscoper gives us a better appreciation of the uncertainty both in the baseline loading of the catchment and the estimated reduction in loading as a result of interventions. And spatial outputs of surface connectivity and topsoil P can be used as additional lines of evidence to inform engagement strategies and catchments and increase the likelihood of interventions improving the water quality of the lakes and reservoirs. So that's me. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Emily. Brilliant. And thanks to all our presenters. And we'll bring you all back in now so that you can answer the questions that people have posted. We'll move straight on to that. One question that looks appropriate, particularly for Paul and Sophie and Jody, is Bruce says there's some fantastic examples of catchment management actions that water companies are undertaking, and the benefits that these deliver. And are these being coordinated or reported at an industry level? For example, Water UK or UK Were or whatever. I don't know if you're on mute, Paul. I think you trying. Sorry, can't hear you.
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you
Oh,
now.
can you hear me? Oh, sorry about that. I don't know what's.
Yeah.
I think
No.
it could
Sorry,
certainly.
no.
You can't hear me, or you can?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it could be better, but it's getting better. I think we are trying to, you know, there's various groups that are trying to coordinate this, which in itself suggests that actually we need more communication, more coordination. I think, I mean, I think the range of talks actually illustrate the variety, don't they, of the different areas, and you know, we've certainly got very different catchments to Severn Trent. So whilst I think that there needs to be more coordination and communication, I think, you know, every catchment is different, and you know, that really has to be assessed on its own merits. But obviously there are lessons learned and to be shared. So my comment would be it's okay, but it needs to be better.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. I don't know if anybody else wanted to add anything to that. Jody, we can't see you.
I think I can't see me also. It's probably
I mean,
my wife.
if you've got problems with your connection, don't worry.
Yeah, sorry. I was about to say I agree with Paul. I think yeah, there's some communication and there are some joined up thinking, but we don't have that industry level publicational view. I think we all work quite differently as water companies, so it would be quite nice to pull together something that shows all the results that we've achieved. So I think as a group of companies, we've come a long way and achieved quite a lot in a very, very, very short period of time.
I mean, that is the other issue, I suppose. It's not, although I mean, especially for groundwater catchments, it's not that long either, is it? So, I mean, you know, everybody's still learning all the time anyway. So, and another question that's related is that somebody says, Bruce says, given the fantastic value of these schemes, because I think you mentioned, Jody, the 1:4 ratio. So maybe it's in reference to that. You know, how easy is it to get agreement to fund these schemes through the price review? Given that sort of value. Jody, if you're speaking, I can't hear you.
So it all comes down to the business case. I think the more evidence that we can put to show that catchment management works and we can do it and achieve results, I think the better. I think it's been challenging to get catchment schemes through compared to your traditional treatment schemes because of the risk associated with them. But I think there's now greater understanding around that and the wider benefits that they can bring. So it's now expected that there's catchment schemes within our price review. So it's shifting towards in favour of catchment schemes. But I think it's still a challenge.
Okay, thank you. And Paul and Sophie, is that a similar experience for you?
It's the same, Paul. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, there is a swing. I think Ofwat have demonstrated or indicated that they're very supportive of catchment approaches, and they want to be. We'll see in AMP8 what happens. I think the WINEP, the Water Industry Environmental Programme process is being reviewed, and that'll be very interesting because there is a lot of talk again about more environmental delivery on that, you know, sort of much more sort of outcome focused. So yes, I would agree with Jody. It is, but it is swinging in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We are at 11:30, but there's a couple of other questions. So if it's okay with everybody, I will just pass these on. The first one is, much has been spoken about drinking water quality benefits, but what's being done at wastewater treatment plants, for example, phosphorus? And I think I can answer that question for you, really, because there was a Beyond the Asset webinar that we did a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, Catherine, I think it was, where we had some speakers on that very topic. So I think maybe we could send out a link to answer that question. But there is work being done. I know, Jody, you're doing some work on that, and one of your colleagues spoke at that webinar. So perhaps we leave that question as being answered there, unless you wanted to add anything, Sophie and Paul, on phosphorus, and Emily,
well,
obviously.
Sorry, I mean phosphorus is a big issue, and we've so for this AMP we've got a sort of a hybrid approach really to phosphorus. Is we're actually looking at how we can build where we need to, where we have to, how we can improve our infrastructure, improve our operations, you know, within what's already there. On the other hand, but where particularly at the smaller works where the costs are huge. To put in treatment, we're using a catchment approach, and that's been interesting. It's been challenging, and we're trialing this market approach in Somerset, which would take another webinar to describe really, but it's all about phosphorus, and I think, you know, so we're doing a lot, and we'll be doing a lot going into AMP8.
That's really useful to know, actually, because I think it's a big, it's a big sort of growth area. So I think that, yeah, maybe that is, even though we've done something on phosphorus, maybe there's another opportunity there. So, Emily, I wasn't sure if you wanted to say something on, because obviously phosphorus is for drinking water for your talk. Can't hear you, by the way.
I think you covered it, Paul. Yeah. My connection was breaking. Oh.
Okay.
Off mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh no, you're breaking up. Sorry.
I think you covered it, but my connection was breaking up. I was just going to say. Oh.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. And a question for Jody. Over the time that the Severn Trent team have seen a change, well, have they seen a change in the perception of schemes and efforts by landowners? So, and if so, has this been a positive or a negative change? So, you know, you've been doing this for quite a long time, working with farmers. How has their response to you changed?
Considerably. To start off with, they were quite negative, quite wary of us. We were accused of being the Environment Agency and reporting everything straight to the Environment Agency to start off with.
Right.
That's changed, and they will, some of our advisors, they're the first person, the farmers are the first person they'll pick up when they've got an issue or they don't know what to do, what pesticide to use, they will phone up and talk to our advisors now, and that'll be the first call they make. So it's completely shifted in a lot of our catchments, and that's down to that personal relationship that our advisors have with the group of farmers that they work with.
Okay, that's interesting. And Paul and Sophie, I can see you nodding. It sounds like you would back that up with your experience.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think, you know, that the challenge is really to get the farmers involved, isn't it? That is the key thing. I mean, they are the people who are going to make the changes on the ground. And if you can't convince the farmers to do it, then nothing's going to happen. And certainly, you know, Jody talked about regulation. That is another huge area in terms of how regulation gets involved with this whole process, and that's a big challenge at the moment. Going forward, but yes, we've certainly seen a change in farmer attitude, and I think as Brexit looms, you know, the impacts of Brexit and the uncertainty in agriculture, I think that's leading people even, you know, it's raising more awareness and an interest in these schemes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And last final question, we didn't have time to feed in the poll, which was about, you know, 50% of or more people said they saw what they expected, and then 30% different from what they expected. But maybe this last question has kind of got sort of a hint of an association with that, which is, you know, is there an increase or focus on climate change? You know, is that increased focus on climate change that is becoming more apparent, which is obviously good? Is that increased interest affecting interest in catchment management? And maybe also related to this poll, are your expectations likely to change? You know, would you expect different impacts because of climate change? So 2 questions there in one. Is climate change making catchment management more interesting for you and for farmers? And what are your expectations? Open to anybody.
Can I pick that up? I mean, I mean, it will be different for different areas, but one of the big things we've noticed is with bentazone, actually, and in our area, you know, with oilseed rape, the returns for oilseed rape growing have reduced with the weather getting better. We've seen a lot more use of winter beans and peas, and therefore a lot more bentazone. And we kind of flagged this to the company back in 2014. and started, made sure that we were monitoring for bentazone, and we're beginning to see that coming through now. And so, that has been, I think, one of the direct results of climate change, and I think that's going to become more significant. So we're certainly flagging to our directors that climate change is an issue, and we need to think through the implications.
Okay, thank you. Any other final comments before we close on to that question, or anything else from our panel?
Can you hear me this time?
Yes. Yes.
I was just going to say, certainly when we're looking at the cost effectiveness of catchment management solutions compared to more traditional hard engineering solutions like treatment works and things, when we're assessing the wider benefits of catchment management, the carbon benefit is certainly something that comes into it, and something that clients are more and more interested in for their carbon targets as well. So the benefits catchment management can have to those.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay then, so thank you everybody for asking so many excellent questions. Apologies if we haven't had time to answer all of them. And thank you very much again to all our speakers, to Sophie and Jody, to Paul and to Emily. It's been really interesting. Thank you again. And thank you everybody for attending. We've had a good list of people. Thanks for your questions. We hope that you found it useful. You'll receive an email shortly with a link to the recording, and we hope to hold further webinars in this Beyond the Asset series. So please look out for our emails and share with your colleagues. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.